If you've ever driven a car, if you've ever worked a 9-to-5 job, or if you've ever taken a weekend trip out of town, in a strange way, you've lived in the world Henry Ford built. But who was he really? A farmer turned billionaire? An innovator who gave ordinary people freedom? And a man who, when he died in 1947, reportedly left behind $700 million in cash. Let's dig into the story. Henry Ford was born in 1863 on a farm in Dearborn, Michigan. His father expected him to take over the land, but Henry hated farm work. He once said, "I never had any particular love for the farm. It was the machinery that attracted me." By the age of 12, Ford was already dismantling and reassembling watches for fun. Neighbours and family members would bring him broken clocks, and the boy would tinker away, figuring out how to get them working again. To most people in rural Michigan, Henry was just a restless farm kid, but in his mind, he was already dreaming of a life built around machines. At age 16, he left with nothing more than a few dollars in his pocket and walked to Detroit to become a machinist apprentice. By his 20s, Ford worked at the Edison Illuminating Company as an engineer. And here's a fun story. In 1896, he actually met Thomas Edison at a company dinner. Ford told Edison about his idea of building a horseless carriage powered by gasoline. Edison slammed his fist onto the table and said, "Young man, that's the thing. You have it. Keep at it." That encouragement lit a fire in Henry Ford. And from that moment, he was determined not just to make a car, but to make one that everyone could afford. After a few failed attempts at starting a car company, Ford finally launched Ford Motor Company in 1903 with $28,000 from investors, which is about $1 million in today's money. 5 years later, the Model T rolled off the line. Simple, durable, reliable, and most importantly, affordable. Henry wasn't physically getting his hands dirty, assembling every element of every design. He's more of an engineer and visionary, rather than a one-man fabricator, and he designed the overall concept of his first cars. In 1908, a Model T cost about $850. A few years later, thanks to Ford's innovations, the price dropped to under $300. Ordinary farmers, factory workers, school teachers, people who had never dreamed of owning a car suddenly could. At its peak, more than half the cars in the world were Model Ts. The real genius wasn't just the car, it was how Ford built it. In 1913, he introduced the moving assembly line. This was radical. Instead of skilled craftsmen building cars from start to finish, each worker did one small task, over and over. A car that used to take 12 hours can now be made in just 93 minutes. Output exploded, costs dropped, and Ford's profits soared. This methodology was groundbreaking at the time, and it's something that's a common trend I find when I deep dive into businesses for these videos, and that is niching down is the best way to go. And in this case, on a micro scale. One person's sole job, for example, could be to fit the right front wheel of 100 cars per day, which, when done on an efficient schedule, can make profits skyrocket. And here's where Ford made another shocking move. He doubled workers' wages to $5 a day. At the time, most factory jobs paid about half that, because Ford was tired of high worker turnover, people quitting because the job was brutal, and at the time, it was. A fast-paced work environment doing the exact same thing every day, surrounded by the same four walls. Henry Ford, however, recognised this, and pioneered another common business tactic, paying a premium for A-player employees, and reaped the benefits massively. He wanted his workers to be able to afford the very product that they were building. This wasn't charity, it was a strategy. By creating better paid workers, he also created customers. Henry Ford was also a man of contradictions. He lived in a mansion later in life. Personally, he preferred a simple rural lifestyle. Like many great men, he didn't drink. He rarely travelled for pleasure, and he kept a disciplined routine. He was also deeply loyal to his wife Clara, and they had one son, Edsel Ford, who would later take over the company. Ford even had a personal newspaper called the Dearborn Independent and often published his thoughts about the world and business. His writings were so widespread that people such as Thomas Edison, Franklin Roosevelt, Walt Disney, and even Adolf Hitler admired Ford. By the 1920s and 30s, Ford's iron grip on the company started to backfire. He hated change. When competitors like General Motors started offering cars in different colours and styles, Ford resisted, and he famously said, "Any customer can have any car painted in any colour they want, as long as it's black." That stubbornness nearly sank the company. By the 1930s, Ford Motor Company was losing ground. It was only thanks to his son Edsel's push for new designs and later World War II contracts that the company survived. Ford also had violent clashes with unions. He hired private security force that beat striking workers in what became known as the Battle of the Overpass. Henry Ford wasn't just a businessman. He was a dictator inside his own empire. So when Henry Ford died in 1947, newspapers reported that his fortune was around $700 million in cash just sitting there, which would be tens of billions of dollars in today's money. But did he literally have $700 million in cash lying around? Unfortunately, that's a myth. Most of his wealth was tied up in Ford Motor Company stock and other assets. The company was still privately held, meaning the Ford family controlled nearly all of it. And that $700 million figure was the estimated value of his estate at death. Even so, it made him one of the world's wealthiest men at the time. And Henry Ford lived to be 83 years old when he passed in 1947, which is an age so great it was almost unheard of back then. He changed the world in ways he couldn't have even imagined. He didn't just give people cars, he gave them freedom, the ability to live further from work, to travel for pleasure, to think of life in terms of weekends and vacations. He also reshaped how we work, the assembly line, the 9-to-5 shift, the idea of mass production. These became the backbone of the 20th century economy. But Ford's story is also a warning. His genius was matched by stubbornness and a need for control that sometimes held his own company back. In the end, Henry Ford was a man of vision and contradictions, a farm boy who hated farming, a businessman who paid workers generously but also crushed unions, a genius who put the world on wheels. So every time you turn the key in a car, sit down for a shift at work, or take a weekend drive out of town, you're living in the world that Henry Ford created, and maybe that's worth more than all the cash in the world.